Mrs. Sloan? Mrs. Johnson? Okay. Mr. Bear? Mr. Greenstein? Mr. Hohauser? Mr. McDermott? Ms. Naldoni? Mrs. Naldoni. Thank you.
I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, February 24th, 2015. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? 7. Alan Bear, 7. Oh, thank you. I am going to go briefly out of order this evening while everyone gets seated. I would just like to bring to everyone's attention, for those that don't already know, Dr. Mooney had a slight accident over the vacation and fell on the ice. She broke her hip and she has had surgery. She's recuperating, and our central administrative team has decided they're going to do it. They're banding together, and we're all going to get through this with Dr. Mooney working remotely. And in case of any kind of emergency or on-site situation where we need to have a designated acting superintendent, that will be Mrs. Callahan, our superintendent of business, our assistant superintendent of business. We all wish Dr. Mooney well, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from her because she's already texting and emailing and calling us. If you'll just bear with me for a moment, I am going to cover the district announcements that I have received. I will start with athletics. This weekend, the Nassau County Wrestling Championships were held for the first time ever in Schreiber wrestling history. We are sending 2 wrestlers to the New York State Wrestling Championships. They are seniors. They are seniors Sam Goldman and Elmer Mendez. The championships are this weekend in Albany, and we wish the young men good luck. Senior Sam Goldman was recognized this week as the News 12 Scholar Athlete. News 12 came up to the school today, and the interview will be on Channel 12 all night tonight during the sports report. There are 4 track athletes, 2 boys and 2 girls, competing in the New York State Winter Track Championships. Neve Devine, Jenny Aguilar, Peter Kurgis, and Aaron Sif Scher will represent Port during the first week of March at Cornell University. Good luck to them. Our boys swim team, thank you. Our boys swim team and girls winter track team were conference champions this winter. Congratulations to them. The girls and boys basketball team held special events at their final home games. The boys hosted PYA night as part of the Coaches versus Cancer cause. They raised almost $1,000 for the American Cancer Society. The girls basketball team held a Project Purple night as part of their PYA night. If you remember, the Safety and Substance Abuse Task Force brought in former NBA player Chris Herron to tell his story of substance abuse. The Letter Club and 9th grade health classes promoted standing together against substance abuse as a theme throughout the week, culminating in a sea of purple shirts and messages at the game. Good job by all of them. Thank you, Stephanie Joannin, Director of Athletics, for this update. Now I will go to the arts. Thank you, Kevin Scully, for this update. 20 Port Washington students were selected for the Art Supervisors Association All-County Art Show. These students, who represent all grade levels, will exhibit their art at Adelphi University on Sunday, March 15th from noon to 4 p.m. And then the other one, which was late breaking news, I'll just have to, okay. On Tuesday, March 3rd at 7:30, orchestra students from all of the district schools will participate in the Night of 1,000 Strings, which will be hosted by the Tilly Center Arts Education Program at Tilly Center for the Performing Arts, LIU campus of Long Island University. The event will also be sponsored by the Creative Art Department and a generous grant from Hearts. Approximately 300 string players from grades 4 through 12 will fill this wonderful performance hall with music, culminating in a combined performance of the classic Irish tune from County Derry, also known as Danny Boy. For anyone that has not yet been present at the Night of 1,000 Strings, it's really magnificent, unmatched, wonderful. I urge you all to attend. And finally, on March 6th, 7th, and 8th, the Weber Middle School will present its spring musical, Legally Blonde. The performances will feature over 100 students, including a live pit orchestra. The Friday and Saturday performances are at 7:30 and 7:30 p.m., and the Sunday performance is at 3 p.m. Thank you very much. We will now move to the student and community comments. I would ask that everybody please remember to identify themselves for the record, and please keep to the 3-minute limit.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Silverstein. I'm the co-president of Parents Council. I am also a parent with children in the high school and elementary school. I am also a Merriman Main Street School, Weber, and Schreiber graduate. I have spent the majority of my life in Port. I care deeply about this town, this community, and its future. I believe in the importance of this bond. I've heard a lot throughout the past 9 months. It's too much money, it's too rushed, it's not necessary, it can all be accomplished in the annual budget, it should have all been accomplished in the annual budgets of the past. It should be voted on in May, and many more. All I can say to this is enough. The time is now to come together. This community needs this bond. I have been involved throughout this process, probably more than I ever care to be involved in anything, and I am satisfied that every project, and I know there are a lot of projects, is needed. Recently, I was very moved by the response to Bruce McDonald's plight after his house fire. I got the email about the GoFundMe account. I had Coach Mack as a driver's ed teacher. I called my husband and I said, I need to donate. He said, give what you think is appropriate. I went onto the website and was blown away to see that within 3 days, they had surpassed their target of what they wanted to collect. I scrolled through the names, many I recognized and many I didn't. I know there are plenty of Port donors who had no contact with Mr. McDonald. They just said, Port person in need, I'll give. I had tears in my eyes, just as I do at the end of It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve. And I say, that's my community. This is what I love about Port Washington. Whether it's Hurricane Sandy, the Main Street fire, Bruce McDonald, a boat fire, someone in the hospital, someone who is struggling, the coat drive, the holiday drive, we are there. We give because it's the right thing to do. We sacrifice to help another because there but for the grace of God. We are a community that cares deeply. I know we are a diverse community. It is something that makes Port so special. I know there are families that struggle to make ends meet. I understand. But I also know that without taking care of our schools, putting money into our schools to repair them, to update them, to expand them, we cannot survive and thrive as a community. We cannot be the community that everyone thinks Port to be. Yes, we have the water. Yes, we have the great train line. But that's not what keeps so many alums coming back. That's not what brings new families out from the city, other states, other countries. It's our schools. It's our commitment to our future. It's our sense of community, of caring for one another, of taking care of one another. And this vote is a vote for that. We need to preserve that. Those who are advocating a no vote are the same people who have demanded our school budget to be kept so low before there was even a tax cap that none of these so-called repairs could be made. The district had to make hard choices then to appease them, and I'm glad they chose programming and teachers over those repairs. But enough is enough. If you don't want more taxes, that's one thing, but to say these repairs can be taken care of in the annual budget is ludicrous and insults everyone in this room. There wasn't enough money then, and there certainly isn't enough money now. I have seen time and time again what makes Port so special.
3 minutes.
It's people, it's community. On March 10th, join me when I will be voting yes for the school bond, a vote for our children, our community, and our future.
That was great. I just wanted to take this opportunity, since we had a bond fair tonight, I'd just like to take this opportunity to invite everybody here tonight, your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, whoever, if they're a Port Washington voter, please consider coming to the Port Washington Educational Assembly's forum, which will be held this coming Thursday night, 7 p.m. at the Public Library, Port Washington Public Library, where we will be discussing the $70 million bond in depth and answer any and all questions. And that's all I have to say. Please consider coming. And by the way, unlike tonight, we'll serve coffee, decaf, regular, and munchkins. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Christopher Wilson, a senior at Schreiber High School, and tonight I want to talk to the board about the research program. For the past 3 years, I've been part of the math research program, and it's given me some of the best opportunities of my Schreiber career. The program has taught me how to think creatively about mathematics, something that no other class at Schreiber truly offers. Further, the program helps us develop crucial skills, such as how to write professional research papers and how to give public talks. The research program at Schreiber is extremely unique and extremely successful. It is a program that allows our brightest students to shine and helps make this district so attractive. Having gone to research competitions, I've been able to speak with various students and teachers from other districts and seen how budget cuts have managed to virtually destroy their programs. The key to conducting successful research is allowing students to pursue what interests them, interests which are frequently diverse. With each project being individual, the only way to ensure the success of these projects is to keep class sizes small. Research teachers must be able to work with their students individually, and this becomes impossible if class sizes increase to 20 or 30 students. The research program has been a crucial part of my experience at Schreiber, and as the board considers its plans for the budget tonight, I only ask that future students be afforded the same incredible opportunities that I was. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to time myself as well. Hello, my name is Caitlin Ferris. I'm also a senior at Schreiber High School, and I'd like to say first off that I agree with everything Chris Wilson has said. I'm also part of the social science research program, and it has been a key part of my time in my high school experience. But that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to discuss the theater program and our theater funding here at Schreiber. I started in 6th grade. My brother was a part of it when he was in high school. My sister was a part of it as well. And a big point of it for us is how many plays we put on and what we do with it. What we do is we used to have a fall show, a winter show, and a spring show. And due to budget cuts, we've cut the spring show. And that was a really big blow for us. It was a blow to me personally. I can't do the fall show because I'm in swimming, because I like to do a lot of different activities. And to me, that severely cuts the amount of theater I get to do during my time at Schreiber. And for that, I am very, very sad. But secondly, I'd like to talk about the fact that the funding itself has really pushed the stress of funding the program and the shows themselves to the students and to the directors. And because of that, they've really become a lot more aware of what shows will draw audiences instead of what shows will be the most fun for students to put on. A lot of times we've done Beauty and the Beast recently, we did Shrek for the summer show, and it's been more about the audience, it's more about how many people we can drag so that we can have funding, more than what will the students enjoy. And I think that stress and that idea that we have to make ends meet has really decreased the fun and the joy of theater itself. And if the funding continues to get cut and this continues to happen, if we lose another show, you know, our drama club itself is already self-funded. That's already all on the students themselves to draw the money and to raise that money. And while they do a fantastic job to ask the theater program itself to continue to self-fund, you know, it's already become $40 for a student to just have money to order costumes. Every student now has to pay. And now that we're becoming a more exclusive club because some kids can't afford to pay that fine, it's becoming a significant issue. And I'd really like you to think about the fact that arts is something we stress in our community. We are a fantastic community with well-rounded students, and I'd like to keep that. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Rossetti Duran, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the Manor Haven PTA. Like Stephanie, I too grew up in Port Washington, and I was a 1992 graduate of Schreiber High School. First tonight, I'd like to thank the board for all of their hard work on the bond. It's been a well thought out and carefully considered endeavor. I'm also here to express the Manor Haven PTA's unanimous support for the bond, which we believe is critical for the future of education in Port Washington. We've heard a lot of criticism about the bond that it's all about maintenance. That's just not true. More than half of the $69 million will be going towards new construction so our children have the space they need to learn. As we know, Port Washington is a vibrant community that has long been known for its outstanding school system. Indeed, many families, including my own, have been drawn to Port Washington for this very reason. As a result, Port Washington is one of the few school districts on Long Island with a growing student population. This is especially evident at Manor Haven School. I have 3 children between the ages of 4 and 9. In the fall of 2010, when my oldest child entered Manor Haven, the student body was 391 children. The school's population has drastically changed since then. Currently, there are 460 children at Manor Haven. That's an increase of nearly 18% in only 5 years, and there is no indication that this trend is slowing down. Given the dramatic growth, there are presently no spare classrooms at Manor Haven, which is a serious problem. As a result, housing important programs and services like PEP, OT and PT, band, and orchestra is becoming increasingly difficult. The school's administration has already faced tremendous pressure to engage in what can only be described as creative classroom juggling. And I'm fearful about what will happen should the bond not pass. I'm not quite sure what this Manor Haven School will do with our growing population. We learned today at the Parents' Council meeting that it's unlikely we would get any more portables to house additional students. So the likely result is we would have even larger class sizes than we already have. That is not okay with me, and I doubt is okay with many people in this room. It's time to pass this bond. We need it. It will allow our school and many of the other schools that are starting to become overcrowded to get the additional space they need. It will also allow our school and all the other schools in town to upgrade their facilities. All of this will ultimately benefit everyone in Port Washington.
30 seconds.
As the school system will continue to be a draw for families with young children, which in turn supports our property values. No one wants to live in a community with cramped schools and outdated, dilapidated facilities. Please join me on March 10th in voting in favor of the bond. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jesse Epstein, and I'm in the Schreiber class of 2015 and the Skidmore College class of 2019. Thank you. I wrote this when I heard about the decision to cancel the Schreiber Chinese program, which involves Chinese 1, Chinese 2, Chinese 3, and the school's Chinese club. I am giving this speech on behalf of all the students in Ms. Fahn's classes. This speech should serve as an example of extremely beneficial impacts that the Chinese program has had on me and my fellow students. If you travel almost anywhere in the world, you will come across students that are multilingual, often being fluent in 2 or 3 languages. Despite the fact that we like our country's reputation as a land of hope for immigrants, as well as a land of cultural diversity and equality, most American citizens speak only one language, English. I believe that our country is seriously lacking in the field of language and communication, and providing greater education will only help to solve this problem. When a person learns a new language, his entire world is expanded and now open to new people and a new culture. Increasing one's ability to communicate only increases the richness of one's life. With today's problems in the world concerning racism and cultural discrimination, this program is very much needed in public schools. In terms of our country's standpoint in the world, we also need to consider business and political standpoints. How can we hope to spread the messages of democracy and capitalism if the future generations cannot communicate with the Eastern world? In addition, China has been becoming a world leader in the business world. I do not need to tell you about the levels of imports that the U.S. gets from China. Many top companies and firms also have offices and headquarters in China's major cities. Over the past several months, I have learned so much about the Chinese language and culture in Ms. Fahn's Chinese 1 class. And while Wo De Zhong Wen Shi Hui Hui Mama, or my Chinese is so-so, I have tons of intrinsic motivation to continue my Chinese studies next year in college. May I also point out that I will, in fact, not be here next year. The result of this speech will not directly impact me.
30
However,
seconds.
I am putting so much energy into the cause because I strongly believe that my underclassmen classmates, as well as future students, would be done a great disservice if they were not able to take Chinese 2 and Chinese 1 and 3 in future years. Chinese is a class that I look forward to attending every A, C, D, and F day. My class is at the end of a day, So in times of stress, I am always able to get myself through the day by telling myself, don't worry, I have Chinese later. Between the mix of vocabulary lessons, culture lessons,
3 minutes.
calligraphy, ink and brush lessons, food lessons, etc., I can always count on Fan Lao Shi to brighten my day. This I know for a fact is true for every other student in my class. Thank you.
Shisha. Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the board, the administration, the faculty for the time and effort they put forth for this bond and everything they do for our schools. I applaud and thank the committee, HSA members, community members that have invested their time and energy to identify the many needs the schools require in infrastructure investments. I want very much what all of you want for our kids. Top-notch facilities, and even more importantly, state-of-the-art education and curriculum. Unfortunately, I see this bond measure as never ever allowing us to get there. When colleges, universities, technical schools, or employees are evaluating our students, they're not going to care about the cafeteria they ate lunch in, the lot the staff parked in, or even which elementary school the kids went to. They're going to evaluate them based on their knowledge, the curriculum they studied, their results, along with the overall ranking of our program. This bond measure of $70 million will cost the community about $105 million by the time the loan's paid back. This bond's on steroids. Sounds familiar to a baseball fan. Way bigger than it should be, fully bulked up on PEDs, pork-enhanced distortions. It parcels something for every community, every school, with no order of events, no timetable for start or completion. It's the poster child for pork barrel legislation, the worst and most wasteful leadership. There's literally millions of dollars of unnecessary pork, fees, and interest. The board should be negotiating a new long-term contract first with the teachers that can live within the expectations of staying with inflation. It's business 101. You get your largest cost factor under control and build from there. Currently, every year we hear budgetary moans that we have overcrowded classrooms that preclude us from adding foreign language in elementary schools or a fully funded gifted and talented program or technology programs. It's ridiculous that we just canceled Mandarin at Schreiber. In the end, whether it's via bond or straight out school tax, there's only so much money the community can afford. The assessments go to the same place.
30 seconds.
This plan is exactly the type of bond that has us failing the needs of the kids now. It also makes Long Island the most expensive place to live in the country. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. This bond is insanity. We need to change the game, and I think most Port residents, even those who worked on it, know. Please vote no. Let's continue to work together to get a new long-term contract for our teachers in place everyone
3
can feel
minutes.
good about. And let's move forward with a plan to get the facilities we need. Thank you.
Good evening, board members. Stephanie Rich. Just a very brief addendum to what Mr. Sattinger just had to say. He is certainly an example of a concerned parent, and I think should give the lie to the notion that bond critics are people who are against the schools or against capital improvements. I can only say that I hope the community at large will not accept that caricature of bond opponents' views. You have heard consistently from a number of people opposing the bond. A couple of these folks are construction experts. They speak up at meetings like this, at the Budget and Facilities Committee meetings, and at Parents' Council from time to time, and they send you emails. Now, these people with construction expertise have some legitimate concerns, really legitimate concerns, about the way the contract with the current architect was awarded, about what the provisions of the current contract with the architect are compared to contracts on past projects with past architects, about board oversight, about things like bid rigging, and so on. And when they raise these concerns, they're not doing them to trash the school district. They are trying to do it to get the best possible expense for the money, being aware of all these other things that people like Mr. Sattinger raise. Money should be going to program. In fact, the colleges are not going to care about what kind of cafeteria the child sat in. The vast majority of the concerns of the construction experts could be dramatically reduced if smaller projects were taken on in series, smaller bonds planned out in advance, the science labs first, something on that order, if a sequence were thought out and it was done in that manner. So I hope the community will pay attention to the concerns of the bond critics, and I am advocating a no vote for a bond this size. It's too large.
Hello, honorable members of the Board of Education and Administration. I'm Josh Curtis, a senior at Schreiber High School. I've come today to the first meeting after discussion of the bonds items has hopefully concluded to advocate for a higher budget. As we all know, without the money for a comprehensive set of programs in our schools, no amount of much-needed renovations will help our students. We must therefore remember, as we discuss the next year's budget, that our goal as a school district should not be to appease a flock of tax hawks, but to instead provide actual benefits to our students' education. What does this mean? It means that we discontinue our trend of cuts to beneficial programs when we should instead be expanding them. Elementary school clubs have been cut for years. Why should we deny our young students the ability to explore a variety of interests during their formative years? When I was in elementary school, I learned a great deal through PEP enrichment, and our activities there guided me rather clearly to my current set of interests. Some people certainly criticize PEP for being too exclusive. Why should our answer then be to chop down the program even further? Mr. Hohauser asked a panel of Schreiber graduates a month and a half ago what they would do if they were superintendent for a day. My answer to his question would be the same as my answer to those I just posed. Rather than cut extracurriculars and penny pinch on even standard, proven educational methods like small class sizes, we should be expanding enrichment-type programs at all levels for all students. For far too long, this district has been pressed by phantoms of tax distress, putting off the urgent need to launch our students to the forefront of this generation. As you heard tonight from many students, our Chinese program has made a huge difference to them. Our research classes have benefited not only those who have participated in them, but all who work hard in advanced courses, because Schreiber's having programs like these, like the research programs, alerts colleges that Schreiber is truly devoted to high achievement. And more broadly, it is the tendency to go above and beyond with AP courses, research, PEP, and clubs like Drama Club that once put Port schools at the very top of national public school rankings. It is worthy of note to mention that Caitlin Ferris achieved Intel semi-finalist recognition this year with an experiment that found stagnating achievement gaps across New York State. Based on Caitlin's achievement, it would seem that innovative developments in education grab attention at the highest levels of society. Why then is it so difficult for this district to see that we can never excel until we first understand basic concepts of education, like that smaller classes improve performance? Why are we so blind to seeing that only by increasing the budget to our unique programs, not just research, not
30
just STEM,
seconds.
not just the arts, but all of them together, can we provide our kids with education that they deserve? Most importantly, why has the board been so afraid to say what they know, that the budget has been too small for too long? If we must pierce the tax cap, so be it. I believe that every member of the community would gladly pay a higher budget for better programming, if only you, the board, were to lead them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pam Ohlendorf. I'm the parent of both a second and fifth grader at Sousa Elementary, where I'm also co-president of the HSA. Tonight, I'd like to thank the Board of Education for all the time and effort you've devoted to putting together this bond. From the outset, you've worked with school administrators and members of the community to ensure that the components of the bond address the problems from the past as well as the needs for the future. I appreciate your transparency and responsiveness throughout this process. Our schools are the bedrock of our town, and I strongly believe that supporting this bond will help Port Washington. Echoing what Stephanie Silverstein said earlier, investing in our schools will be an investment in our community. Thank you.
Judy Epstein, I should say. I'm not related to Jesse Epstein, as far as either of us knows. I am a Schreiber parent about to be an empty nester, and I support the bond. But first I want to say thank you for returning to one polling place. which is Weber All-Purpose Room. So get the word out, and that's where any school election will be. I am tired of working at, say, Sousa and trying to tell people how to get to Salem, and their eyes roll back in their head. And if you, up front, were the devious masterminds that you've been accused of being, you would never have done this, because the numbers never recovered of people voting after the election was split into 4 polling places. I think there are people who still never came home. So, but I'm still glad you did it. It was the right thing to do. About the bond, I'm voting yes, and I urge everyone who cares about this town, not just the school, to do the same. I've been watching the board, the administration, and what gets said by the community very closely since they first got my attention, 1999, when the first budget failed since I've been living here. I came in 1992. And that it failed once, it passed the second time, but my oldest was going to kindergarten that year. He was going to start kindergarten, and they needed a 6th room at Sousa, which was not going to get built if that budget didn't pass. So I have been paying very close attention, as much as raising 2 children allows, ever since. I'm a mom, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a past co-president of Ag8 HSA. For a short period of time, I was a reporter for the Port Washington News. I am not at the moment anymore. I've been struck by arguments made against bonds in this town. They're too big. This is all over the place. Why do we need so much work? And what particularly appalls me is people who say, you could have done the work, coulda, shoulda, woulda, done all the work necessary if you had $1 million in last year's operating budget. You could have done it all along with more money in the operating budgets. The very same people who made you take the money out of the operating budgets, threatening our children with failed budgets, with contingencies when there were contingencies, with the tax cap now, the very same people who said it won't pass. And so this district has been stingy, miserly, cheap.
30
and if
seconds.
people want to know why so much work has to be done now, penny wise, pound foolish. I think these people could just find the answer if they look in the mirror.
Frank Russo with the Port Washington Educational Assembly. You appointed me to the Facilities Committee. I did see some things that were clearly in need of repair. The toilets, for sure. The science labs to be updated, no question about it. However, in my judgment, $70 million is grossly overstating the amount that's vital. I think most of this could be done by looking at, for instance, teacher salaries. $116,000 is our middle salary. Rather than give increases there, use some of this money for this other work, for the toilets and for the science labs being updated. But my big problem was the lack of transparency. Someone complimented your transparency. I think you really, I don't know that it was intentional or not. That's what I'm not sure about. But you clearly misled the public as to the full cost here of this bond. Alan and I now discussed it. We're in agreement. I think the full cost is not $742, $106 for 7 years, as is in so many letters. It's 10 times that amount. It's $7,000 for the average homeowner. And I think we've got to make that clear in the mailing that you're going to do to all voters. I think failure to do that is deceptive and is really not consistent with democratic procedure. You've got to notify let the homeowner know what the cost is. When you say on your website, as you do, the cost is $106 for 7 years up to 2023, no additional cost as of 2023, that is false. In my mind, deceptive is the better word. You're saying you're going to use this $400 per taxpayer per year for 13 years or 17 years to pay these new bonds in replacement of other bonds that are terminating. But the voter doesn't understand that when you say that. You've got to tell them how much you're going to charge them, or what would happen if the bond did not pass. If the bond does not pass, it's not just $106 for 7 years. It's that for 7 years plus $400 if it's not, I was assuming $6 million in debt service ends. Alan tells me it's just $4.9 million, in which case it's still $400 per taxpayer per year for something like 17 years that we're going to have to pay. You want to balance the needs of our students, and I absolutely agree with a lot of the comments made here by the students. You got to balance educational quality with the needs of the taxpayers and the burdens that they're currently facing. The taxes here are unlike any place else in the country. It's mind-boggling. And we've got to be truthful to them. The fact that you're telling them no additional costs of
30
2023
seconds.
is totally deceptive. And I'm very sad to see that. Now, I know Karen mentioned you're going to try and straighten that out and let people know, but you've got to do that in the mailing to all the voters in this community to really do this in an honest way. And Alan and I do disagree on the pension cost factor. We are going to save $2.5 million this year. That could do this work for the updates of the science labs or the toilets. Next year, we disagree. We're disagreeing in the future. I think this pension cost reduction is going to go up to $5 million. And I think we could do this work over the years with these $5 million less in pension costs. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matt L'Enfant. I am a parent at Sousa and Weber, and I'm also co-president HSA at Sousa. My wife and I, moved to Port Washington 6 years ago because we knew that the school district here was highly rated, and we wanted our kids to have a good education in a good environment. We're very happy here and love this community. We feel part of it and want to protect it. After being involved for many years in our school and community, we know that our building needs serious TLC and that our shrinking budget can't pay for all the needed renovation without affecting our amazing programs. And soon, we won't be able to respond to growing enrollment and the next science curriculum standards neither. If that means I have to spend $100 a year for 7 years to stay on top, I think is the best investment. Not only we want to give our kids a good education in a good environment, but we also want to give them the tools to succeed. The district needs this bond, and we, parents, support it. We will vote yes on March 10, and we believe our parents and members of this community will logically do the same. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meredith Stagman. I'm a Schreiber parent and a Weber parent, former Manor Haven parent. I, too, want to show my strong support for the bond. I've chosen to live in this amazing town and raise my children here. I love the school district, and my children have excelled immensely. However, we're facing dire circumstances here in the state of our facilities, in the space, in the security, in the science labs, in the fields, in the bleachers, and I can continue to go on past my 3 minutes just on that. I want this to be a community where my kids want to come back to and raise their children, where our property values continue to increase for everyone, whether or not you have a child that is currently in the district or not. That's the reality of the situation, and this bond is so far from a luxury. And I'm quite frankly so tired about hearing that it's a luxury. With respect to the statements that were made before about the quality of the colleges looking at the quality of our Schreiber cafeteria, when people mention that, they just are really not seeing the big picture here. We're talking about our kids not having a nice cafeteria, but actually having a place to sit and not sit in the hallways when it's cold outside. We're talking about kids not sitting with coats in classrooms. We're talking about kids learning in current science labs and not ones that were around before I was born. It's in terms of the statements that were made about schools, each school having to get something, it's not that each school has to get something, it's that each school in this district needs something. So that's what that's about. And with all due respect, contrary to other statements that I've heard over and over again, we as parents, as voters, are keenly aware of what the financial aspects are. We're not ignorant about it. We're not being deceived about it. We're aware that there's a bond that's coming off the books in 2023, that this new bond will be replacing those costs. We know we're not getting a windfall. We know we're not getting previous bond expenses put back into our pockets. And I know I can speak for myself and most of the and all of the HSAs to tell you that no one's deceiving us, the board has not deceived us, and no one's trying to deceive us. And finally, in response to some other comments I've heard on other nights as to why this $69 million bond can't be cut in half and why we can't put up a smaller
30
amount.
seconds.
We had a large bond that was put to a vote, for those of you who remember, and failed over 10 years ago. And in response, it was drastically cut and put up again and then passed. And that is why we're partially in the position that we're in right now. We started to cut corners and do less quality work that would cost less. And that's why we're here right now. And unlike other school districts that have successfully passed smaller bonds, we live in a much larger district. So for anyone to say this is loaded with fluff or non-essential items is just not seeing the reality of it. I urge everyone to come forward on March 10th and vote yes. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Robin Dubert. I'm the parent of 3 children in our school district. I'm also one of the HSA co-presidents at Guggenheim, and our board voted recently, and we are behind this bond. I just want to talk about a couple of things quickly that were raised tonight that it just bothers me that I feel like there's information that keeps getting put out there. I worked in construction with construction contracts and the bid process. I understand the process that you went through, that the architects were vetted, that they took this on a retainer, and when you engage someone like this, that you aren't going to get 2 architecture firms that are going to put this much work and time and effort in without being paid or the hope of being paid to compete for this. I also understand that the bidding process will take place with public monies especially in a fair process after it's approved by the state. And the state, we have no idea how long it's going to take at this point for it to be approved. So it's really impossible for you to have a true schedule of when things are going to happen. The last thing that I've seen floating around that is very upsetting to me is the knocking of the numbers in our district. I know that districts across the island are experiencing a decrease in enrollment. If you take a look at Guggenheim or many of the other elementary schools, it is very obvious that our numbers in this town are an exception to that rule, and I really hope that that is a turning point or something that people hold on to in looking at this bond and voting for it to help our kids. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Steve Grossman, Vice President of AAPW, proud parent of 2 Schreiber graduates, and looking forward to supporting this bond.
Good evening. Pete Smith, the president of the AAPW. That's the Athletic Association of Port Washington. I came here tonight just to tell you how proud I am at the progress that we made on this bond, not just only on the athletic side, but also on the educational side and the facility side as well. Not only being a owner of a construction company, I sat through every single one of these meetings. I've toured every single one of the schools, and I am 100% certain that the process and the movement that you're making on this bond is 100% correct. As far as the APW side of the athletics, I've heard some things in the past few weeks that this bond is all about athletics, which it obviously is not. But on the athletics portion, I've also heard that athletics in Port Washington is slowly starting to dwindle, and that's the absolute furthest from the truth. I'm actually the Commissioner of Girls Lacrosse in PYA. I'm also on the Board of Directors of the Business Improvement District, and Port Washington is flourishing every single way possible right now. The kids that we're talking about athletically, my numbers are pretty much 1,000 students at Schreiber, 800 students at Weber, and there are over 2,000 other kids that have not even come into the upper grades yet that are PYA, PAL, and also Port Soccer. And being so affiliated with the sports in this town, I see probably, I would say more than 50 to 60% of the students that are pulling 3 different sports per year. And even because of lacrosse and soccer now being full-time, we've arranged it that these kids are now doing both sports. As far as the athletic fields here at Schreiber, I really don't want to say anything about my age, but I am an alumni of Main Street School, Weber, and Schreiber. I've played on these fields. I've been on these fields. I've coached on these fields. Okay? What we're talking about is the turf on the side field and the turf on the upper field, returfing
30 seconds.
the Whitney Field, and putting in proper facilities. Currently, what we have right now is dangerous, and what you're proposing is right on. And as far as the construction end of things, you know, bathrooms falling apart, labs needing to be upgraded, and everything that you stated that I've witnessed with every step of the way with you is 100%. As far as the APW, big yes vote. All 4,000 of us. Thank you.
I'm Jim Ansel, and I've put 3 children through the school system. One was a gifted child. She tested like 99.8 percentile. There was nothing for her here. There was no program. What we need here is to reinforce core education, and I'm all for improving education, not facilities when you don't need to. I also had another child that was special ed all the way, and she got through. And I had a middle child that didn't want to be in the PEP program. She just preferred to dress in black and walk around. You know, there is there is some things here that are a little deceptive that I have to say. You know, the cost of the bond, obviously, you know, it's going to be, I calculate it to be $106 million, and you can't hide $106 million. Basically, from the moment this bond is passed, everyone, every average homeowner here will be indebted $8,000 for the next 20 years, and that's before you invest in the college education plan, before you improve your home, and before you, buy a vehicle. I also have a huge difference with the gentleman before me. You know, what's needed here is repairs. Repairs is not infrastructure. Repairs can be done quite cheaply. So this bond is really an overkill, and it saddens me to say that you're failing education with this bond because you're going to burn up, waste $50 million at least. You know, and I'm present. You know, it's not going to work. What you're doing, wasting millions of dollars in things in facilities. Also, I have a difference with your enrollment projections. Your demographer said, well, at 5 years, things get very fuzzy and tenuous, uncertain. Yes, because all the census projections at 5 years indicate enrollment is going to drastically, it's going to drop. The infrastructure is not failing. That enrollment it will increase is dubious, and it saddens me to say that you're going to waste $50 million, and that's not the way to improve education. Your money needs to go into education. Thank you.
At this time, we will end community comments. There will be another opportunity later this evening, but we have to move on. We have some students here tonight to receive certificates. We'll have another opportunity later. Before we get to the certificates, though, I would just like to take a moment to thank everyone for coming out tonight, regardless of your opinion. It is truly a pleasure to see so many people interested in the school district and the support, and I know a lot of staff is here tonight. I thank you for coming out, and especially, I believe, showing your support for the superintendent in her absence, so thank you. I would just like to comment on a few of the comments that were made. Once again, I just have to take exception to ever being accused of being misleading or deceptive. And I was asked today by a community member if I feel that it is my moral obligation to inform the citizens of the community in an honest way about what's going on. And yes, I do. And I believe that our entire board does. And I believe that without exception, anyone that has reached out to me for any answer, any factual answer, I have gotten back to within a matter of hours. So any questions I have answered, and I'm always happy to do so, and anything that could be made more apparent or clear or transparent in any way has been done so. And to that end, there has been one specific question, and we've been accused of not being transparent or being deceptive, and that is the amount of money that would go back to the taxpayers in 2023 were we not to do anything in the district and not to raise any money in any bond for any of the projects we're talking about, and that amount would be between $400 and $450 for the average taxpayer. So that's now on the record. It will be posted on the website. We will put it wherever else we can as we go forward. And I would just like to say to that end that our budget committee, it just has to be recognized here tonight because it's our last meeting before the vote. And regardless of what happens at that vote, it's really important for people to understand the amount of work, the time and effort that's gone into informing the community and formulating this resolution and that what will be voted on March 10th. And the amount of time that went into considering the implication to our taxpayers to make that as low as possible. And it's really a credit to Mary Callahan and Alan Baer, and I think tonight we just have to say thank you very much. And now I will move on to certificates, and I thank the students and families that are here for being so patient and listening to all this interesting conversation. So I believe, Vernon, do you have one of the certificates?
I do have one of the certificates. This is a fantastic thing to be able to read. We saw her speak at the podium eloquently about helping make sure that the theater program can thrive, and she talked a little bit about the social science research program. And the Paul D. Schreiber High School was informed by the Intel Science Talent Search that one student in the class of 2015 is qualified for semi-finalist classification. Approximately 1,800 applicants applied for this most prestigious competition, and Intel recognized 300 students in their schools as semifinalists this year. From this gifted group, 40 finalists are selected for final judging in Washington, D.C. Each semifinalist receives a $1,000 award from the Intel Foundation, with an additional $1,000 going to his or her respective school. This student has distinguished herself as a scholar and is an exemplary member of the Schreiber School community. The entire school community is very proud of her achievement, and we wish her well in the next stage of the process. The project was the trajectory of the New York State Achievement Gap, possible factors, and the results of No Child Left Behind. The 2015 semifinalist is Caitlin Ferris. Congratulations. Come on up.
Okay, thank you. On Thursday, January 8th, students from Neil Miller's Schreiber Automotive Technology class participated in the 2015 Regional Automotive Competition and placed first in the competition. The automotive team then attended the New York State Automotive Competition Finals on February 11th at the Greater New York Automobile Dealers Association in Whitestone, Queens. The team, designated team number 1 by the judges, attended the competition as a top-ranked team in the state and was able to achieve second-place status overall in the state. The Schreiber Automotive team beat out all other top teams from strictly automotive and technical high schools on Long Island, New York City, and Westchester, Rockland County, coming in just behind the overall New York State winner from Orange, Ulster, BOCES. The students were taught by Mr. Neil Miller and Mr. Donald Schaefer, and the team consisted of Adam Hussein, Tyler Hamilton, Brandon Morales, Alec Sakosa, David Walmark, all seniors, and sophomore David Ferguson served as the supply and equipment manager. So, congratulations.
Congratulations. And now I will make a motion for the approval of the minutes for January 13th, 2015. Second, Mrs. Johnson. All in favor? 6-0. Mr. Hohauser's not in the room. And now we will move to the discussion item, our budget. Ms. Callahan?
Good evening, everyone. So far this year, you have heard bond, bond, bond. So this evening, we're just going to do some basic historic information and give you a first draft of the budget. You can see over this 25-year period how Port Washington's enrollment continues to grow at an average of 66 students per year. It was mentioned earlier that we do see a growing enrollment. We did have a demographer come in and prepare a report for us for the purpose of the bond, which indicates that we will continue over the next 5 years to add another 4% or so to our population. Excuse me. Our budget over the last 5 years is shown in this chart. The draft at this moment is with a 1.46 budget increase, which is the lowest budget increase I have in my records in the central office going back to 1992. The levy limit, which is allowed by New York State this year, is 1.62%, which is the reason, and I wish some of our students were still here to hear the reason why our budgets shrink rather than expand. Unfortunately, every decision seems to become a financial decision, at least relative to part of the decision making. And I think that school districts have been forced to create a number in many instances rather than a program to fit a number. This is district staffing over the last 3 years, which has been relatively constant. You do see that there is an anomaly in the security aid number, and that is simply because in this past year we did add security guards for the weekend, excuse me, and we did have an increase in our educational assistance during the 14-15 school year after the 14-15 budget had actually been adopted. As of this moment, our 1.42% budget increase reflects a dollar amount of $2,101,388. This is actually lower than what is the actual cost in staff salaries and debt service for the 15-16 year. We were able to accomplish this in part because, as you will hear later, maybe in more detail, the teachers' retirement system did lower the required contribution by school districts because the funds that they have grew at a greater rate than had been anticipated, and thus the amount required by the school district to be contributed was adjusted accordingly. We still have a number of unknowns. The first and greatest one, in my opinion, is that of state aid. The projection that I have provided this evening assumes the same amount of money as last year. That anyone who has followed the governor's statements has indicated that there are certain items he must have in his budget or there will be no budget. Therefore, I cannot, in good conscience, ask the board to assume any increase in state monies unless it is guaranteed to me in writing. We do, based on our growth at the elementary levels, we believe that we do need an additional elementary section at Sousa, and I believe the other one is Guggenheim. That is based on current enrollment. Obviously, that can change between now and the end of the school year, but just based on existing numbers, we do anticipate that. We have the question of kindergarten enrollment. In some areas, we are seeing an almost over enrollment at daily, I believe it is. Just the other day, we received the latest notice, and they are just one fewer student away from what had been projected for next year, and we're only in the month of February. Some of the other schools are still under-enrolled, and again, it is only February, so we are watching that closely. There is a need to create a special education class at the middle school. As you know, we have tried to bring back a number of our students, and we have successful programs running at the elementary level. Some of those students are aging out of that and will require services that we would like to provide to them in a new program at our middle school, rather than asking for those students to be sent out to other districts for their educational program. There is also a new regulation of the commissioner for what we used to refer to as ESL, English as a Second Language. It is now referred to as ENL, English as a new language. The difficult part of determining whether we're going to need a class to meet this regulation of the commissioner is based on complicating factors such as a test that preschoolers will need to take, which is not given until June 1st. And until we know the count of the students who might be interested in this program and whether their parents are interested in them being in a bilingual class, we're not sure if we are going to need the position, but this is a topic that you will hear from us again at the next meeting. I just wanted to show you this one state aid chart because it does show that in 1989-90, that is the blue lines that you see, it is the state aid throughout the state of New York. I apologize that the print is so small, but there was no other way to get every region on the chart. And in 2012-13, that is the area in red. So you see that every area of the state, with the exception of one, shows an increase in 2012-13, the area in red, all but Long Island, which is the fourth area from your left. In Long Island, we are actually receiving less aid than we did back in 1989-90, and I would like you to also know that Long Island sends, of its income tax, 20% of the state's income tax comes from Long Island, and Long Island is the area that is receiving less state aid than any place else in the state because we are considered so wealthy. I provided a report, a document like this to the board last year. I'm happy to say that as of the figures I provided in March were within several $100,000 of the final audited figures as of June 30th, 2014. These are key figures for the Board of Education to understand. It is what I refer to generally as the district's savings, but within that savings there are different cubbies or where we can put our money based on showing our auditors the need for those savings. And those dollars go into a variety of non-spendable and restricted accounts. What you see as of June 30th is 2014 is the actual dollar amount audited for health insurance premiums, unemployment, retirement contributions to the employees' retirement system, not the teachers' retirement system, because legally we are not allowed to set up a reserve for the teachers' retirement system. Employee benefit accrued liability, which is a long way of saying if every employee in the district resigned and the school district closed on June 30th, we would have to pay out $1,400,000 in unused vacation time as of June 30th. And workers' compensation funds are retained based on the amount of outstanding claims because the district is self-insured. Assigned means we have money that as of June 30th we have committed the district to. We have placed purchase orders and either have received the goods but not the invoice, or we have received the invoice but not the goods. So we have to hold that money aside to pay our debts. And then last year in our budget process, the board did agree to take $3,973,560 from their savings to offset the 15-16 taxes, or the budget rather, because the tax levy was already determined by the levy limit formula. The $3,973,000 allowed the district to maintain its program by funding the gap between the total cost of the budget and what we were allowed to tax the taxpayer. We were short almost $4 million. So that left us as of June 30th, 2014 at $2.9 million in unassigned monies. That was reported to the public in October by our external auditors, Dark Angelo. I have now in the right-hand column prepared estimates as to where I see those same accounts tentatively landing as of June 30th. Now, when I spoke to you about having a draft budget with an increase of $2.1 million, in order to meet the levy limit, the difference between the levy and the total amount of our budget leaves us with a $2.5 million gap, $2,568,000. There's an asterisk there because in meetings with the Budget and Facilities Committee, we have talked about potentially filling part of that $2.5 million gap with $1,398,000, which is the figure that was approved by the Board of Education, not for the current budget that we're in, 14-15, but the year prior. For the 13-14 budget, the board authorized $1,398,000. So the discussion in the committee has been to potentially be able to take money from reserves in that amount, 1.398. If that were to happen, it brings our unassigned fund balance down to amount which is almost equal to the appropriated for subsequent years. We would have $1.394 million left. It would cut the gap down to $1.1 million, and the unassigned fund balance of $1.394 million is just under 1%. The law allows that a district may have an unassigned fund balance equal to 4% of the subsequent year's budget. The budget that is drafted at this point with the $2.1 million increase is $146 million. Now, after I've given you the good news, here's some good news, lest we forget, as I say. You may have read or heard on the radio about a report that comes out of the New York State Comptroller's Office, which I think is actually an excellent report that communities should be knowledgeable of. It's called a Fiscal Stress Report. It's been in place for 3 years now. The scoring is a weighted scoring for a variety of different reasons, which I will go through. And each year, the district is rated based on these financial and environmental factors. As you can see, last year we were, when they say 2014, they are saying the 2013-14 school year. So they are looking at the financial reports for the 13-14 school year, which match the audited figures that were presented to the Board of Education in October. All of that information goes to the great big computers in the sky up in Albany from almost 700 school districts, and it's all used in creating these formulas and projections. So as you can see, our score has gone up this year. That is not a good thing, because that is saying we are getting closer to the range of being in susceptible fiscal stress. And that, in fact, 90 school districts in the state of New York are already designated either in susceptible, moderate, or extreme fiscal stress. The fiscal indicators that changed for us were our unassigned fund balance, because that number went down, so they don't think that that's a good thing. It's saying we have less in case of emergency. Our cash ratio to current liabilities and our cash as a percentage of our monthly expense was noted as one of the factors this year for the first time. And the reason for that is that in the months of July through October, before we receive any tax money, we still have bills and salaries to pay for. Each year our budget increases, but over the past few years we have not increased the amount of money that we have borrowed on a short-term basis to make up for that, excuse me, the gap in our revenues until our tax monies come in. So this is being factored in from the state's perspective as not a good indicator. And environmentally, again for the first year, was a decline in property values. Before anyone gets too upset about that, I have to remind you that the New York State Assessment Office is 2 years behind on the actual assessments. So while this is a report for 13-14, it's reflecting the value of homes in 11-12. So I would imagine that next year we will still see this as a decline. Property values are certainly going back in the positive direction in Port Washington now, but I think it will be 2 years before we see that reflected in this report. This is another statewide document that shows Long Island schools are other schools right here on Long Island. The amount of money that they have in their savings relative to their total budget far exceeds Port Washington. 23.6% for Long Island schools. Port Washington, 10.1%. We still have 10%, but relative to those who think that we have money to burn and that we can afford to do many more things with the monies that we have, I would point you to this particular chart as well as to the controller's fiscal stress report. Oh, sorry. That is the last slide. The Budget and Facilities Committee is meeting on March 12th for our next discussion. We are meeting again with administrators. We certainly are aware that we do have a $2.5 million gap. I would at some point ask that the Budget Committee resolve with the full board where we stand relative to how much money can be afforded from our savings to fill the $2.5 million gap. The numbers that I have presented this evening did offer the expectation that we would be using $1.398 million, but certainly that is a decision for the full board and not only the Budget and Facilities Committee. And if anybody has questions, I will take them, but I don't know that I've given you enough to ask me many meaty questions.
Chris, did you want to start with questions?
I'll let her sit down.
I was just waiting for her to sit down.
Yeah, she's good. She's got her notes.
All right, so there's talk in the state about the state fund runs coming later than what we usually anticipate. So could you explain just quickly, if we are allotting a certain amount in our line budget, if we get to a point where we actually have to adopt a budget without that number, how does it work?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. If we do not have any factual data from the state, we will use the exact same number of dollars that we have received for this year. Only once in my career did I see that that number was even reduced. I think that it is prudent to use a number that we have. Once the budget is adopted, if in fact there is additional state aid, it will go into the district savings. It will become part of fund balance for use by the board in a subsequent year.
So we can't use it for that budget?
Once you have adopted the budget, you have to have revenues that match your budget number. So, for example, we have a $2.5 million gap. We either have to find the $2.5 million through savings that we currently have, or we have to cut program by that amount, because there is a date by which you legally have to adopt the budget. I think we have it set for April 16th. If on April 30th, the state says we're going to give you $500,000 more, you've already adopted the budget. So you're taking money from your savings account for the $2.5 million. When the $500,000 comes, it just goes back into your savings to help replenish.
The 1.1 gap, if we pulled out the 1.398.
Yes.
In your opinion, would you go against trying to pull that much more out based on our numbers?
If the board had to pull, excuse me, $1.1 million more out of their savings, that the unassigned, which is $1,394,000, would become about $200,000. And unassigned, I do not believe that's prudent.
Can you just confirm that bond money cannot go towards programming?
Bond money, you mean?
Money we raise from the bond.
Oh, no. If the community approves a bond and we borrow money, it can only legally be spent to pay the bills associated with those public bids which are not rigged. And that was the only thing I did take umbrage to.
Public bids that are rigged.
Right. That someone must know about public bids being rigged, but they're not in Port Washington. So
You're saying you can't put money for programming in a bond. Is that your estimate?
Oh, put money in a bond for programming? No, because you would be paying for 30 years for what you spent. Right. It's sort of like using a credit card that you can't pay for to buy food. It's not a wise investment.
So, and this might be somewhat rhetorical, when community members say that we should be putting money into programming instead of a bond, is it possibly that they're actually saying that perhaps we should go above the tax cap to help pay for our programming?
I have not heard anyone say that they would like us to go above the tax cap. I have not heard anyone say that they do not want the rebate check that comes from the state. I have not heard anybody tell me that they don't want their taxes frozen for the next couple of years. I have heard people say that they would like to have a more rich program, but no one seems to offer the way to pay for that, because there are costs associated with programming. And as I said earlier today, programming means teachers in the classroom, and it means support staff. We are an employee-rich organization because we are dealing with children, and we only have children for a short period of time, and they need the best that we can give them in the time that we have them.
There's a lot of pressure because the county itself, everyone has to come in under the tax cap levy, correct, for that rebate check?
Yes. And I will even say this here, because all of the budget increases are going to be published in Newsday, as are the levy increases. You will see some of the North Shore districts who will perhaps have less than a 1% levy increase, in part because of the teachers' retirement system contribution that has gone down, and some districts that had much greater increases over the past 5 to 7 years have been able to adjust their budgets accordingly to not have increases at all. But our budget has really been too tight, as is reflected in our savings. If our budgets had been larger than they needed to be, then we would have had money left over at the end of the year, which would have legally had gone into the district's fund balance. And our 10% versus 25% of other districts shows that we, as Mr. Baer continually says when we talk about budget, that we spend 99 cents out of a dollar in our budget. We have no money left at the end of the year.
As of now, and it's still a little early in the process, have you heard any school districts locally around that might be considering piercing the tax cap?
No one.
Thank you. You're really sort of depressing me. To follow up on one of the questions Chris had, what is the last day that we can legally adopt the budget?
It's 30 days before the vote itself. The last day that the school district has a scheduled meeting is the 16th, which is a Tuesday. It's probably the Thursday or the Friday of that week, but I try to give you as much opportunity as possible to consider all your options.
So if the state does not come to a budget resolution by that date, then even if they decided afterwards to give us extra money, we can't use it to help the kids. We can only use it to replenish our fund balance. If they come to an agreement April 1st, then we could potentially figure out how to allocate those additional tax revenues.
Because you have a gap already, you have to fill the gap before you could even increase the program and not tax the taxpayer. So you have to first find the $2.5 million, and then if you wanted to add $500,000 in programming, you need to find $3 million. If you got 500 from the state, or if you got $1 million from the state, that's great, but you already have a gap before you can even consider improving program.
I guess I misspoke. By improving program, I meant not degrading program by as much. So, improving it from the condition that we may find ourselves in, not improving it from where we are now.
So, if I could just say, we anticipate coming back to the board certainly with what may need to be considerations for making that gap, meeting that gap. But and you calling it degrading, so if more money came in from the state and you knew it was coming into your savings, you could say, well, rather than eliminating what had been discussed for X number of dollars, we received X number of dollars, so we will keep that in the budget.
Thank you. I know the political reality of trying to pierce the cap, and I realize how difficult it is, but I guess the more philosophical point is I view school expenditures for school as an investment, not as an expense. And when I invest, I like to get a good rate of return. So if we're spending 1.62% increase and we're getting at best a 0 increase in educational outcome, And yet, if we went to a 1.92% just for number, and we are just picking a number out of the air, and we got a 5% increase in educational outcome, would that be a better bang for the buck? And I think globally and long term, that's sort of the way we have to look at it. And no, I'm not suggesting we try to pierce the cap this year, but just in terms of looking, because this problem is not going to get better in future years. So at some point, we are going to have to really, we're going to be faced at the point where being under the cap may degrade our educational outcome by a certain percent, and if we want to hold steady, we may have to look at going over it. So I'm just throwing that out as sort of as a long-term thing. I think we need to be looking at in our plans, and certainly in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are keeping reserves. So I agree with you. There are limits that we can't go below in terms of hoping that everything falls into place in a year, and the state tells us our pension is negative 15%, and they're giving us back all the money we've paid in the past, and and they triple our state aid and make up for everything, because I don't think that's going to happen. So anyway, thanks for the depressing but good work.
Sorry, I echo the sentiments, but I have some questions on the data, and I don't know if we can. Is it possible to bring the projection back up so everybody else can see what I'm asking about? Thank you. I get the historic enrollment data, and I look at the 5-year history, but I would go to the, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Look at the 5th page, which is the major areas of increase in the draft budget. And is it I just want to make sure no, it's before that.
Yeah.
Okay, right, that page. There we go. I have questions on the other ones too. Where it says here the 4 additional elementary school teacher sections, et cetera, the new hires, is that your estimate? The $660,000 represents the cost of the new hires?
The $660,000 is for staff in this current 14-15 budget, hired after the budget was approved. Therefore, their cost is new to this 15-16 budget.
Right.
Yes. So
yes.
that is the expected additional cost, because otherwise the staff salary increases would have been lower.
Right. That's just what I want to make clear.
Yes.
If not for the new hires, we're looking at about a little less than $1.5 million actual increase in compensation for staff.
Yes.
Okay. And all right, let's go to the next page. This is there are some issues here that have been raised. Right now, because of this new wonderful mandate, I'm sorry if I'm displaying my personal beliefs about the ENL regulations. In the event that is invoked on those, do we have any estimate of what the costs will be? I think we had some preliminary estimates that we'll have to face without additional input, dollars from the state.
Well, we know certainly there will be, if we have sufficient parent buy-in for this program, because parents have the choice of opting in or not, we will definitely have a teacher cost, an aid cost. We will have transportation costs, because the children will be housed in one building regardless of what their home catchment area is.
Now, the question I have is that the way you said, the way the regulations are structured now, the parents actually have to opt out of the program, not opt in. Isn't that the way it is?
Dr. Westerveld, is it that they opt in or opt out?
Parents have the option to opt out of the program.
Right. So the default is going to be that students who are eligible for the ENL would be placed in those separate classrooms.
If we have 20 or more.
20 or more with it.
Okay.
And do we have any estimate of, let's say there's one language for which that's invoked, or one class, what that cost would be?
Well, it would be the cost of a teacher's salary plus the benefits and possibly a teacher assistance.
As well as the transportation.
Correct.
And that cost is not factored anywhere into this preliminary budget, right?
It-
Correct.
Okay. Right, I just want to make clear that there are additional costs that we don't know yet, and we're not, if they are invoked, we're not likely to get aid for that. So, and then, let's turn, if we can, about the general fund balance, which is just 2 slides in. Now, if I remember from the D'Arcangelo audit report, there were, I asked some of the questions about the unassigned balance and what their opinion was about the unassigned balance. And if I remember correctly, they said that our previous unassigned balance was barely adequate and among the lowest of the school districts they audit. Drawing another $1.4 million out of our unassigned reserve, as you said, gets us to approximately 1%. Is there any other school district on Long Island that has an unassigned balance that low?
One.
Just one in Nassau County, on a per student basis.
Which one?
There's only one. I have a slide that.
Yeah, no, I'm anticipating, Alan. And on the slide where you're talking, the last slide, which is the total fund balance as a percentage of gross expenditures, we're looking at the bar charts. Last one. Okay. That's comparing again. That's not. Have we done a comparison of unassigned fund balances? And would this, if we did so, would it be right that that our position would be even more exacerbated than other Long Island schools, and certainly medium downstate schools or all schools? The differences, I meant.
Between the total fund balance and the unassigned
if we
fund
compared
balance?
unassigned balances from Port Washington with other schools of similar size or similar location.
I have not seen data broken down exactly that way, but I would venture to say that it would be similar for unassigned as it is for the total.
And let me ask you this, from a budgetary standpoint, would you be comfortable with an unassigned reserve of only 1%?
Looking at this, I would say that would be our best case scenario. If we do not want to dismantle something to the tune of $2.5 million, which is the gap, and the board puts forth an agreement to allow for the 1.398 that, as they have in the past, that will leave us with approximately 1%.
Plus any unspent money at the end of this budget, if there is any.
If there isn't.
Right.
Would you anticipate generally, well, Alan's figures, we spend 99 cents out of the dollar, so we might have 1% left over at the end if things go well.
Right.
Lights? Thank you. Ooh, it's like magic.
In the past, there's no question that am I on now? Am I on now? The unassigned balance, if it gets dangerously low, it just sounds like it's dangerously, or, it's not prudent to let it go that low, and us being, with the lowest or the second lowest in the county doesn't sound like a good place where we want to be. But what have we used our unassigned balance for? What kind of, have there been emergency situations where we've used this balance before in this, say, the last 15 years? I remember the Manor-Haven roof, I think we used fund balance for, but when does it actually come up? What kind of catastrophes or emergencies?
Well, fortunately, the only emergency work that we have had done, at least in my time here, was the Manor Haven roof. Unassigned fund balance is traditionally used for the offset of the subsequent year's expenses. The most school districts, at the end of their year, if they have more than 4%, they will authorize that funds above and beyond are placed in one of these legitimate restricted reserves, whether it's for workers' compensation or one of the others, based on the needs of the district. And then, as this district has in other years, we have pulled money from the restricted funds that can also be used to offset part of that $2.5 million if the board so chose.
What would be the procedure for pulling the restricted funds? Is that only able to go to certain line items or certain areas?
No, the board would pass a resolution. Say, for example, there's $2.8 million in the Employees Retirement System Contribution Fund. The district is allowed to have at least 2 years' worth of expenditure for that pension fund in their reserves. We have under 2 years' worth, but the board can pass a resolution to release that money. It would then flow down to the unassigned fund balance, which would reduce the total restricted monies and increase the unassigned. It doesn't change the grand total, but it allows you then to use that money to fill the gap.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. About the restricted funds, is there a rule of thumb that you use as to the balances? I mean, there's not many of them, but you know, you mentioned ERS must be less than 2%. We're 2% max, right? We have.
2 years worth.
I'm sorry. 2 years, right? And we're less than that. But is there a rule of thumb that you're using for that? Because it may look, it looks like we may, have to resort to removing some of the, reallocating from the restricted to the unrestricted.
Right. I suppose I would say that they are all amounts that the auditors have recommended based on being prudent and fiscally sound. The unemployment reserve is at $208,000, probably because there were several years where our expenditures exceeded $100,000. We did have a period of time where people were leaving and collecting unemployment, and so based on that, we're allowed to hold 2 years' worth of expenses. It does not mean that you're going to use it. It means you have it for an emergency. If you have a year when in the middle of the year you see your expenditures are so far exceeding what you have budgeted on the revenue side, the board has the authority then to take those revenues and add them into the budget. The board has the authority also at any time to move these monies from the restricted down to the unassigned. Workers' compensation, we average over $600,000 a year in expenses. As I said, the employee benefit accrued liability. This is an actual number that is calculated on the number of vacation days per the number of individual employees who are entitled to vacation days as of June 30th of the year, and it's calculated to the dollar. And we are not allowed to have a penny more than what we need, but we are slightly under what we are allowed to have. So there's $5 million in the, combined in these restricted reserves that can be moved if the board chose at a time to use that to fill the gap, or if I came to you and said in the middle of the year, our unemployment expense is going through the ceiling and we will exceed our budget, and I need your authorization to have our revenues match our budgetary expenses.
Okay. So for instance, let's say on the ERS restricted fund, it's less than 2 years. What's our 1 year budgeted expenditure? Sorry.
Last year, our actual expenditures were $2,535,000. So we could have $5 million in that reserve.
And that's still budgeted for, right? So that line item remains as part of the budget.
Right.
And then this is a separate amount that we just use the budget line item amount to determine approximately where, as a measure
Of anticipated expenses.
The other question I have is I just want to go over one more time the benefit to the community for staying within the tax cap as it relates to this refund check that probably will happen. I've heard it a couple of times, but if you could explain it to me once again so that maybe I have a chance of understanding it.
Sure. The governor and the legislature for the we're in the 14-15 year, right? For the current budget that was authorized last May, the 14-15 budget, if we stayed within the levy limit, the legislation said that even though your taxes go up and you pay those increased dollars, you will then receive a rebate check from the state of New York for the increase in your taxes. There was a limit, I believe, on personal income that could not exceed $500,000 in a household in order to be eligible for that, but I think that was basically the restriction. The same offer is, as they would say, on the table for the 15-16 budget, although the governor has also added an additional requirement that the superintendents are discussing now as our business officials, which is to show that for the next 3 years, school districts will be able to save 1% of their tax levy, and that is to be provided in the form of showing how, since the 2012-13 school year, school districts have saved money, whether it's from buying through a cooperative program or we thought they were going to allow us to include savings from hiring staff at a lower salary, but a new notice came out saying that we can't even count that money. But to make a long story short, districts must submit by June 1st a plan for this $1.3 million savings, in addition to passing a budget within the levy limit in order for people to get their rebate check.
Okay, so if your budget or your planned expenses were to go up by, just to use the numbers, 2.6 million, but through savings, cost savings ideas, you were able to reduce it to only 1.3 increase. You have to just demonstrate that you saved 1.3 million, and 1.3 is about 1%, you're saying, of our budget. So it's just really, you could say, oh, it was going to go up 10%, but it only went up 2% because of my cost savings idea. So it's more of like a demonstration rather than hard numbers. Or I guess the most, yeah. Go ahead.
The part that's the most frustrating for me is that I meet with my colleagues and they all tell me about their wonderful cost savings. But Port Washington did those cost savings before 2012, and if you instituted it prior to 2012, you can't count that savings. For example, when we did reduce our bus fleet by 7 or 8 vehicles and saved $500,000, that would have gotten us halfway to our planned proposal, and we can't count it because we did that in 2010-11 or something.
So are we going to be able to demonstrate? Oh, we're not really sure if we'll be able to get there, but we're optimistic.
I would not say that at this moment. I would not. I am not there yet.
And then just again on the timing of this, the 14-15 fiscal school year is now. And so then people, if they're eligible, I guess they would be, if they're below the income limit and they're eligible for the refund, well, they've already received them for last year's, okay. And so if we stay on track for 15-16, then what is the tax year that they got the refund for? It's 2014, and then for 15-16, if we adhere to it for 15-16, then they'll get it at the end of 15. Okay.
So if I'm correct at this point, our next step is going to be by March 12th's budget meeting, we will have a better understanding and appreciation of some recommendations of where we can be making some cuts to get closer in our gap.
Yes.
And we will have to make a better determination about the money we're going to take out of reserve.
Correct.
Because one way or another, we have to meet the gap. Right. I'm right. Yes. Okay. So does anyone else have any questions about tonight? Okay. So we can move on to Mr. Baer's presentation. Thank you.
Actually, I brought these for Hank Ratner because he always copies for everybody who was here, because I'm not sure you'll be able to read it when it goes on. Okay. Oh, is there a light here? Ah, how nice. Okay, like I said, I didn't think you would be able to read this. Just in general, so if you want to pass these around, these are 40 copies. Just take them all down, and I'll bring them back up here. Souvenirs. Paper later on. What this tries to point out, and what we tried to look at, is very often during the budget presentations, we look at Port Washington in a vacuum. And so you get numbers up on the screen that refer only to the district. This is, well, let me back up. What happens is BOCES publishes a report which analyzes all of the budgets of the various school districts. And it might even make, I wonder if we should turn on the light. You can probably still. What you're looking at is a recap of all of the school districts in Nassau County. And it's the 12-13 year, this just recaps, if you will, the different school districts there in red. That's alphabetical, the first two sheets, just to show you all the different school districts. What you end up, going too fast. What you see there in the next slide, if you go 3 pages in, thank you, is the enrollment in Port Washington. We have the 13th largest enrollment here in Nassau County. And then when you move forward from there, we have the 11th largest budget in Nassau County in terms of real dollars, in the $133 million that was the budget total back in 12-13, according to the BOCE's figures. Moving from there, our fund balance, and it's been an interesting topic tonight, we dropped down into the 27th position as to real dollars. But what I've tried to do then, as you move over towards the next two side, is couch it really in what we spend per student as far as in comparison to other districts in Nassau County. And the figure of $25,276 is much lower than you might imagine when you hear everybody talk about taxes here in Port Washington. That number is 27 down. And then if we move one more to the right, our name disappears. And this is where we start to rank left in the district. And what happens is we actually have to go to the next sheet where we rank with $2,545 as of the $13 million fund balance. We Nassau County. And if you were to adjust this now to the $9 million that Mary has given as far as where we'll be on June 30th of this year, we would be just one from the bottom. Out of 56 school districts, unbalanced now, having used it, that we are 55th out of 56 school districts. Just to go back to this slide, on the far right, when you look at budget dollars, if we were to equalize what we spend or what we are as our neighboring districts who are above us, if you go all the way to the top, you would end up looking at, if we were matching, for example, I should get to the right page, I apologize. If we were spending what Carl Place spends, our budget in Port Washington would be $190 million, not 100. And so you can see down this whole thing, and everybody, you have a copy of it and can read it. You see all of the differences in all the school districts who are clearly outstripping us, if you will, in what they spend. And so this slide is another one then that benchmarked, and I apologize for going quickly, but I know we're going to bump up against everybody falling asleep. Admin cost per student. We received several emails during the year on an ongoing basis that we have too much admin in the district, that we spend way more than our fellow districts. But again, you'll see on this first sheet that our name actually disappears when you look at the administrative cost in Port Washington per student. And when you go now here, we're at the top of page 2, where again we spend $23.55, as opposed to districts that are spending nearly double that, if not double that, as far as their administrative support for children. We are well down in the 30-something number. Returning back to instructional cost, we actually come out right where we were again, and that puts us back to the 27th spot as far as Nassau County districts. So we are right in the middle as far as our cost. This one is a chart that you don't have in the packet, but this is a peer district analysis of what our fellow districts on Long Island spent, not on Long Island. I took the 10 districts that we often consider and benchmark ourselves against, and on the far left you have Locust Valley, and then moving across the school all the way to the right, spending the least amount of money out of the 10 is Port Washington. And so when you look at whether it's Locust Valley, Jericho, North Shore, Great Neck, East Williston, Syosset, we are at the far right of the expense chart against what our fellow neighboring districts are spending on education on a per student basis. We also received several emails. This again, you don't have any more of these. These are sort of extra slides here for the fun of it. We've received several comments, and just recently Mr. McDermott was sort of character assassinated by one email for voting to pass 1.5% budgets by one of the residents of the community. And so we did a little research and found that back in 1990, the average expense per student was $14,000, and we had 3,670 students. That's right there to the right of the dollars. The implied budget at that point was a little bit over $51 million. Down the left-hand side, you have the date. Then right to the right of that, you see the inflation rate from 1990 through 2013. And if you take the spending per student and you just add the inflation rate, you end up down at the bottom there with $24,971. The biggest change that occurred from 1990 till now has been that we gained 1,600 students and have just under 5,300 at the end as benchmarked by BOCES. And the implied budget at that point is $132 million. The BOCES report has us at 133.6. So throughout those 24 years, we absorbed pension, state mandates, all sorts of things, and literally kept the budget all the way even with the rate of inflation for 24 years. And so for people then to run around and, oh, everything is out of control, you're spending wildly, the facts don't actually bear that out. And so the numbers are there. Now, segueing, if you will, into some of the comments on the bond, and following up on some of the earlier comments that Mary's made, Karen made, and then some of the residents have made. There's a flyer that was handed out at the train station and in several other places with several comments about paying for everything out of the pension. There's one specific line that all the work without a bond can be paid from annual budgets, especially given our definite 25% pension cost reduction in upcoming budgets and likely $5 million a year reduction. The Budget Committee took some time last week. We called actually the actuarial office of the state of New York, of the New York State Teachers Pension Fund, spoke to the head actuary himself, and he told us that on the part of the school district that there is no way that you can count on that and budget for it on ongoing. Any district that was going to do that would be looking at a disastrous, and that 90% of the pension amount is calculated on the basis of investment returns that the state teachers. And so based on the guy who's really in the know, who writes the report, entire school districts function on across the state of New York, he said it would be improper for the Port Washington School District to budget future capital costs on the basis of pension reduction. This is a chart that shows where they've been. There's a 5-year lag, but what you end up, unfortunately, when you're in the budget side of this, like we have been, you find out more stuff than you ever really wanted to know about.
How I hate to interrupt you, but I just want to, there's a point that's been going back and forth with emails and everything about the pension costs, about the future increases. What was that opinion about whether it's wise to budget on future projections?
We would be absolutely improper, and we would be running our fiduciary responsibility if we were to make our future calculations based on pension reductions. Right. The pension fund has built into it that it will earn 8% a year going forward forever, and based on earning more or less plus some other factors, that's based on what then the contribution rate that it has to earn. There's a 5-year lag that it uses. It takes the last 5 years of investment returns. There's a complicated algorithm that then comes out with the contributions. The little valley that you see in the middle goes back to the roaring 90s stock market, because on the left side of the chart you have 1990, on the right you have last year's 17%. And so what happened after the stock market went wild at the end of the 90s and you had the internet bubble on the tech side and it burst, you then saw as a result the continuous climb up as pension cost increased. We then had the debacle of 2008. And the major reason we have experienced a decline in pension from 17.25 to 13.25 is the dropping off of the negative return of 2008 to a positive return of last year. That is not likely to be repeated because subsequent years already were positive for the New York State Teachers Retirement Fund, and so we have seen the bulk of those returns. Another thing driving the correct. Right. Sooner or later, the market will not go up by 15% or 10 or 8 or 7. We will have a problem. In fact, you even have a problem as you try to lap those years going out 4 or 5 years, because you then are you're going to drop a 16% year, and even if it was a 10% that year, you actually have a decline in the formula at that point. The other thing impacting, and these are just wonderful reports, you see in the red shade the peak has been reached and has started to decline, and that's actually the active members in the teachers across New York State, somewhere just under 275,000. And the gold going up, now passing 150,000, are the active people drawing retirement benefits. If you extrapolate those out, and for want of anything else, the statewide population trend continues, not Port Washington, but statewide, eventually those lines get closer and closer, and that will mute or actually cause greater increases because the overall salary pool may not increase fast enough to balance the reduction actually of teachers across the state. This is the famous, there have been articles written into the Port Washington News, there have been statements here at this microphone about Tier 6 and the impact that it will have. Tier 6 is the black shade there on the chart, roughly 6% of the total membership of the active teachers in New York State. The green is Tier 4. The average age inside the green pool is somewhere in the mid-40s at the moment, and the average age now of retirement of teachers in New York State has climbed from 56 to 60 and a half and is continuing to go up. That gives us at least 15 more years of active green teachers for the bulk of it before we see a large increase on the pie slice that's black in color there, or Tier 6. The other thing that will mute Tier 6 is that across the state, because of reductions in student populations, there have been teachers who have been excessed who are already in Tier 4 and are applying for the new jobs where teachers are retiring. We see it even here in Port Washington, where we have hired, as part of our process, teachers who are 5-year experience, 6, 7, 8 years experience, but let go in other districts. So they are filling open slots. We are gaining experienced teachers, but they are also Tier 4 people, so that will also continue to mute any impact. And again, it will not magically, in the next 2 or 3 years, as has been put forward several times from right here, dramatically alter the construct of the pension fund. This is another chart you really can't read too well, and I apologize. I'm never quite sure what actually ends up there. Mary must use like font 40 or something to make it so clear. There are a couple things that have been brought up. Also, right in the middle, the top box that I've highlighted there is the actual impact of Tier 6 and Tier 5 on the pension rate. And what it actually did is it lowered it by 0.11%. 2 boxes below, or 2 lines below, is the mortality rate of people within the pension fund. It has increased the cost of the pension because people are living longer, just as we see with Social Security, by 0.04%. So the net of that is 0.07, or is literally 0.0007. The impact to the Port Washington budget was $38,000. So not $5 million as people have put forward on this piece of paper. And so I don't imagine that $38,000 will buy too much of the bond on an annual basis. This is a chart over the long run of the retirement fund from 1920 to 2010s, this decade. Over this entire period, 10.93 has been the average. We are at 13.25, so yes, could there be another 2% that we might see? You could even see a little bit more for a year or two, but over a long-run basis, the actuary made the comment that you will see 11% or more based on demographic changes. You will not see a consistent rate below that. Finally, the pension fund themselves and the actuarial department released this bulletin just this month, and they go on to say in the box there that school districts should not expect this trend to continue, and that the reason they've seen it is consecutive years of high-quality investment returns. And so again, it's really impossible for the board or for the community to base future investment on possibly being able to pay for it. If we are so lucky, and by some miracle that pot of gold shows up, we can use it at that point to either restore fund balance, we can use it to pay for the bond when it passes. There's a number of things you can do if the money materializes, but if the money does not materialize, you end up having to fund it from somewhere. Lastly, and that's the end of these, yes, there's this cap that, or comment on this flyer again, that the 70 million bond is a clear example of our school board trying to circumvent the 2% tax cap. When you look at all the budgets across New York State and the law and what the controller puts forward, the word circumvent, I actually pulled up a definition here, is trying to evade through some improper means. And so the controller actually, and the state ed department and the legislator set the rules, and we are following them to the letter. We are not circumventing. We are not trying to do something that is outside of the law. We are following exactly the formula as it's laid out by the state of New York to calculate how the budget should be produced. The 1.46% that Mary showed falls right inside the law. It comes in, it's audited by the state, and so there's no circumventing at all. This is the way school districts are funding today capital expenditures. And to stand at the microphone or to write letters or to put flyers out is disingenuous at best, and honestly is circumventing the truth. Because the truth on this is that this is the law and how we are supposed to calculate it. And so whether you pass a bond of $5 million, $10 million, or $50 million, the debt calculation, it's not something we make up. It is how Mary is instructed to calculate it by the state of New York. And so really that comment is really disrespectful of the community because it portrays the school, the district, the admin, the board as trying to be charlatans, which is far from the truth. I think in the end it comes down to, if I could sort of step out of the presenter and make my comment now that I didn't make there, really a vision of what we're going to do as a district for education. You can vote no on the 10th, and there is no other money then that's magically going to appear to fund science labs, the space for arts, music, security, technology, new space for the kids. It just doesn't exist. So when you want to stand up and say, oh, well, in 2023, you're going to get $350 or $400 back, that scenario only works when you do no construction, when you do nothing, because there will be no money in the general budget to do this. So you have to then stand up, and when you do your presentation Thursday night, please stand up in front of the audience and say to them, this is based on doing nothing, because there is no other money that's going to come magically onto these sheets or into the checkbook of the district to pay for it. And if that's your vision, then that should be what you say, just like you come up here and harangue the board for not doing other things. Your vision is to do nothing because there is no other money. And if that's the vision, then vote no. But if your vision is to have these other quality facilities and improve science, because I was in those science rooms back in 1969 when I was in Weber, and I was in them in Schreiber too, and they need to be replaced. And if you don't think all the other things are needed, then you vote no. That's the way it is. But that's not what I think is the vision. A minimum of 30% of your property value in this community is linked to how well your schools do. And if you think that 20 years of paying $300 or $6,000, think about what 1% is on the average value of your home in this town. 1% is more than the 20-year payment on the bond. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Mr. Bear, for all the work that you've put into this. Thank you for all the information you gathered for this presentation. And I guess at this point, we will move on unless anyone has any other comments. No, yes.
I just want to say thank you very much, Mr. Bear. That was a wonderful presentation. I know how much work you put into it, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, to China.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the action items, item A1 through DH. Do I have a second? Mr. Greenstein, all in favor? 7-0. Thank you. I would like to thank, what? Yes, first I just want to thank the Manor Haven PTA for their generous donation. And I would like to thank the Nassau County School Buildings and Grounds Association for recognizing James Restano, our Director of School Facilities and Operations, for hosting the 2014 Custodial Workshop, and the Voya Community Fund, all for their very generous donations. And now, Mr. Greenstein, you would like to discuss something or make a comment?
I'd like to thank my colleague Christina Naldone for writing it and getting it done. It's about the GEA, which is basically in 2010, New York State started stealing, taking money that was according to their own formula due to school districts and taking it to make up a shortfall in their budget. A shortfall which no longer exists, but they continue to withhold those funds. And this item was a resolution to urge them to restore that money that rightfully belongs to us. So I'd like to thank you for doing it, and I'd like to thank the board for supporting it.
Thank you, Larry, for bringing that up and pointing it out and explaining it a little bit more to the community. And thank you, Christina Nadolny, for writing that resolution. I have to say, in my experience with the 7 of us, that was the quickest group effort of writing something for all of us. So thank you very, very much. And I would also like to recognize under personnel all of our retirements. They are listed and posted, and I just would like to say thank you for your years of service, everyone that is listed here, for all the time you've spent in Port Washington, and you will be missed. And all of those retirees will be recognized at our May meeting, where we also celebrate tenure. And now we move to item 12. We will be adopting a board policy this evening, and I would just like to first make a motion, and then I will make a comment for adopting the Code of Conduct Policy 5144.1. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson. I would just like to say, again, in my experience on the board, I have never had a policy where we have spent as much time and effort and energy in vetting the policy, getting community input, district input, and I would just like to thank everyone that was involved in that, all of the community members that participated, our staff, and especially our board committee, led by Mrs. Johnson. It was very time-consuming, and it was worth it because I think we've come together to have a code of conduct that we all support, I hope. So I will take a vote. All in favor? 7-0. Thank you very much. And now we go to new business. Yes. Yes. Whatever that last D is. I think I said whatever. Did I say what? Well, do you want me to say it again so we can be official? Items A1 through D14. All in favor? Wait, do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0. Okay? So in case I did it wrong, now it's right. And I may have done it wrong because it's late and I'm cold. I think we're saving a lot of money tonight on heat. New business.
I just want to make everyone aware that February is Children Dental Health Month. So, my husband is a dentist, sorry. No, but actually the reason why I wanted to make the comment is because I just wanted to make everyone aware that although you should be brushing and flossing twice a day, well, flossing at least once, foods that are high in carbohydrates are actually highly cariogenic, such as Danish, donuts, munchkins, bagels. And a much better snack to have is like an apple or hard cheese.
Okay, again, it's late. We'll have another opportunity for the community to be heard. Please identify yourself and remember we are keeping to the 3-minute limit.
Hi, Dave Sattinger. I'm even more concerned now than I was before this meeting started. The reason that I've suggested and recommended against the bond measure is exactly because of what we're facing in this coming budget. And the fact that we're being relatively efficient compared to our neighbors doesn't really help the fact that we're up that creek without a paddle, where we're headed. And at some point, we have to change direction in how we go about doing our business as a district. So my kid plays baseball. I want him on the baseball fields. You bet I do, right? I want elite science labs. But at some point, I think we have to acknowledge that we have to start to make some tough choices. And I just don't know that this $70 million bond makes enough of those hard choices. The ultimate plan that has to happen is we need to reduce costs across the board. We have to ultimately come up with a plan to reduce our debt service. We have to come up with a plan that's going to reduce how much our bargaining units cost us. We have to come up with a plan to replenish our reserves. And we have to come up with a plan to invest in our infrastructure. And the concern that I see is we're going about business as we have been, and we're approaching a precipice that I don't think it's a comfortable place for the district. Eventually, as I said before, all the money that we assess, whether it be bond or annual budget, goes to the same people. And the costs on Long Island are excruciating. And I agree that a well-performing school district has an impact on our housing values. It absolutely does. But also, as if every time kids graduate the district, people leave Port Washington, you're putting more houses on the market. That's more supply, and that doesn't help property values. And I think we have to do a better
30
job
seconds.
to find a better balance. So that's why I recommend a no vote. I do think we should have some type of infrastructure long-term plan. I'm not so naive as to think it may not require a bond, but I don't think this bond really reflects making some of the hard choices we have to make as a community. Thank you.
On your flyer, you state what the
Excuse me,
payments
can you
are.
state your name, please?
Jamie Troyes, Port Washington. On the flyer, you state what the payments are per month, but you never really state what the total of the amount of payments are. So my question to you is, what is the sum of $8 per month per X months of X and Y in 7 years? I mean, what is the total amount that the average household payer will pay? What is the definition of the average household payer? And I spoke to a lot of people in town, and a lot of them are saying that when their children graduate, they're leaving. So that's not my opinion. That's what I've been told.
Hi, Jim Ansel. I just Googled, circumvent, because I know what it means, and it means to go around, sidestep or dodge. The meaning that it's bad is archaic. That's no longer in use. So I just want to bring you up to date in definition of circumvent. It also means that it can be done in a clever way, but it doesn't mean deceit. It just means to go around something, to avoid it, to dodge it, circumvent. So our budgets have surpassed income and inflation, by about I think in the last 10 years, our budget's size has doubled, so we far exceeded inflation expenses. Thank you.
Frank Russo again, and I respectfully disagree with the direction you were going, Alan, with the word circumvent also. Many school districts, there are probably 20 school districts in Long Island that are using these bond votes increasingly to circumvent the tax cap, because the tax cap excludes the bond interest payments. They're not covered by it, and that's why that term is used. It's a way to get around the tax cap. It's legal. I fully understand that. Some circumventions, I guess, would be, this is legal. It's a legal way to circumvent the tax cap. I just want to make sure I understand, and I thank you very much for the time you spent on the pension. I think we're in agreement that the pension costs this year 25% reduction for our teacher pensions. The other employees, I think it's only down about 10%. But overall, we're going to save $2 to $2.5 million, as I understand it, this year with the pension cost, because the factors went way up over the last 4 years. Going back 25 years, as we looked at before, the median was about 8%, the factor applied against the teacher salaries. Now it's 17.5, it's going to go down to 13.25. I'd like if you could email me the name of the gentleman you spoke to. I speak to some of these people up in Albany, just to confirm all that. My judgment, it honestly will go up above the $2.5 million over the next 3 years. I'm pretty sure of that. So I'm interested to talk to the gentleman you spoke to, who I'm sure is more knowledgeable than I am, and I want to understand the factors he's talking about. So maybe I'll email you just to get his name, if you're allowed to tell me his name. But I'm pretty confident that figure will go up beyond $2.5 million for 20 years. It's $50 million. We can already say $50 million unless something happens to the market again. The bond vote date was another matter. We didn't bring that up. That's on our flyer too. The Newsday editorial talking about so many school districts that are having separate bond vote dates, doing it to get a lower turnout so you increase the likelihood the bond will pass. And they're calling it very disrespectful to taxpayers. And that is true. And I know, you have other reasons too. The big thing I think you're trying to do is move repair dollars out of the budget and accomplish it with bonds that you'll spread out over 20 years. And that's part of the circumvention of the tax cap. You want to move certain costs out of the budget, put it into the bonds, so you're still getting it out of the taxpayers. I'm trying to balance everything. I'd like to see a balance between fixing what has to be fixed for the kids, the toilets especially. I've heard that from so many moms, science labs especially. The other things are more debatable, and different people have different views on it.
30 seconds.
But I do want a balance between what we're spending, $25,000 per student, and what the taxpayers are paying. 5 of my 7 kids left. A lot of people here want their kids to stay here, and they'd like to be able to stay. I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for what I sense talking to dozens and dozens of people every month on this issue. But I thank you all for that. I respect all the time you put in to what you're doing, because you're all fine people.
At this time, we'll close community comments. I believe, Mrs. Callahan, did you want to make a comment? And then Mr. Hoaz.
I simply wanted to say it's unfortunate that the Comptroller's Office has created a website that only school business officials and superintendents are allowed to go on to input all the information that is required for the tax cap formula. Within that document, on a screen that is part of the calculation, is all debt service for the school district. It is part of the calculation. Whether you like where in the calculation it has been placed by the governor and the legislature, that is a very different matter. It is part of the calculation, and no one is circumventing anything in this district or in any other school district in New York State when they talk about the cost of the bonds. The bonds are listed in the calculation. Thank you.
Just we usually don't do this, but when it comes to mathematical calculations, sometimes there was a contention that the rate of increase in the bond in the budget versus the rate of inflation over the last 10 years has led to a vast difference between what our budget is and I just did the calculations myself, and the difference comes out to be something negligible. It's $200, and that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics database. So as far as I can calculate, over the last 10 years, this budget has been almost precisely at the rate of inflation, at least as the BLS statistics tell you. So I just want to clear that up. That's just hard math.
Easy math.